Rex Heuerman stands accused of 3 and maybe 4 of the Long Island serial killing victims. What took officials over a decade to find a suspect? And what about the other 6 or 7 victims?
I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And today we're going to be discussing these insane case of what's been going on in Long Island. Multiple bodies are found. And right now we only have a suspect for 3 of those.
That's right, 3. They say that they'll probably tie in the 4th victim at some point. But at this point, of 10 or 11 bodies that have been found out by Gilgo Beach on Long Island, they've only got actual arrests on the first 3. They think the 4th will come in, and it's hard to know where to start to tell the story. But at this time, a man by the name of Rex Heuerman is being held. He denies, of course, any involvement, but the evidence that we will go through pretty much ties him both by the use of telephones, burner phones, cell phone pinging, telephone calls that he made, witness statements, and all the rest. I mean, there's a very large amount of evidence.
Mm-hmm. And something that's interesting to consider too is that these cases are from over a decade ago. So it isn't until recently where pressure has been put on for the police department to start looking more into these. But this, we're talking, 2007, 2009, 2010. This happened a long time ago. And it's believed too, one of the reasons that this wasn't looked into more originally could possibly be related to the fact that these victims, some of them were believed to be, escorts, sex workers. So it's kind of thank you society where it's just like we kind of push these things out of the light. But
well, enter Rex Heuerman, who is supposedly a mild-mannered architect working in Manhattan, who lives in Massapequa out on Long Island. And the way the two were connected is kind of a circuitous route, and it goes way back to 2007, 8, 9, 10, when the 4 girls centered on in this case went missing. Oddly, there was no reporting of that, at least that we know of at this time. The story starts way back in 2010. A woman by the name of Shannon Gilbert, who lived in New York. Well, some people say she lived in New Jersey. She's a native of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'm a native of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but I've been in New England for many years now. And Shannon Gilbert went out to Long Island, it is said, to do a trick. She was a sex worker, and she had a driver who drove her out to Massapequa to do this job. And the driver would, to give her a bit of a sense of safety, the driver would drive her and then wait outside while she would go into the house. Well, something went wrong this night, and she came outside of the house. They weren't sure whether she had an episode or there were some substances involved, but Shannon came outside of the house feeling that the man inside of the house, who had actually come out and tipped off the driver that something odd was going on, and she felt that the man in the house was going to hurt her. She wouldn't get in the car with the driver that she knew because she felt he was going to hurt her too. Make a long story short, and it is a long story, she wouldn't get in the car. She ran down the road. The driver, who she knew, who worked with her for a percentage, went after her and tried to get her to get in the truck, but she would not get in the vehicle. She disappeared into the night. That was reported. And that is when the authorities said, all right, we're going to go and look for Shannon. And so they did look for Shannon. Instead, they found 4 bodies of the young women we're talking about in this case. They found the bodies of Maureen Brainard and Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, all wrapped up in a burlap-type substance. People say it's burlap, but apparently, according to the documents, it's some kind of a hunting material that's like burlap. Did you want to say more about these 4 victims?
Yeah, so I have some information about the victims over here that I'll read off to you guys. The disappearance and murder of Maureen Barnes. Maureen Brainard-Barnes was last seen on July 9th, 2007 in New York City. At that time, she was believed to be working as a sex worker. On July 6, 2007, Ms. Brainard-Barnes' cell phone was contacted by a burner cell phone. Between July 6, 2007 and July 9th, 2007, there were 16 interactions between this burner phone and Brainard-Barnes' cell phone. On July 9th, 2007, the last cell site location for Brainard-Barnes' cell phone was approximately 11:56 p.m. in Midtown Manhattan near 59th Street Bridge. Thereafter, Brainard-Barnes' cell phone had no further activity until July 12, 2007. On July 12, 2007, 3 days after her disappearance, 2 outbound calls were made from Brainard-Barnes' cell phone, checking her voicemail from a cell site location near the Long Island Expressway in Islandia. Now, Melissa Barthelemy was last seen July 10th, 2009 in New York City. At that time, she was believed to be working as a sex worker as well. On July 3rd, 2009, Miss Barthelemy was contacted by a burner cell phone. Thereafter, Barthelemy's cell phone was contacted by this burner cell phone on July 6, July 9, and July 10 of 2009, which was the last day she was seen alive. On July 10th, 2009, cell site records indicate the burner cell phone traveled from Massapequa Park to Midtown Manhattan. Later that evening, Barthelemy's cell phone traveled from Midtown Manhattan to Massapequa, with the last cell site location being in Massapequa on July 11th, 2009 at approximately 1:43 a.m. On July 11th, 2009, Miss Barthelemy's cell phone was used to make an outbound call, checking her voicemail from a cell site location in Freeport. On July 11th and July 12th, 2009, the Barthelemy's phone made 2 more outbound calls, checking her voicemail from cell site locations in Babylon. On July 17th, July 23rd, August 5th, August 19th, and August 26th, 2009, the Barthelemy phone made taunting phone calls to Ms. Barthelemy's family, some of which resulted in a conversation between the caller, who was a male, and a relative of Melissa Barthelemy, in which the male caller admitted to killing and sexually assaulting Miss Barthelemy. The cell site locations of the Barthelemy phone during these taunting calls were all in Midtown Manhattan. Now, the disappearance and murder of Megan Waterman. Megan Waterman was last seen alive at the Holiday Inn in Hauppauge, New York on June 6, 2010 at approximately 1:30 a.m. At that time, she was believed to be working as a sex worker as well. On June 5th, 2010, Miss Waterman's cell phone was contacted by another burner cell phone, which had been activated that same day. Thereafter, the Waterman phone communicated with this burner cell phone on June 6, 2010. Following that communication, the burner cell phone had no further phone activity. However, cell site records show that Waterman phone traveled to Massapequa Park, with the last cell site location being Massapequa Park at approximately 3:11 a.m. in the vicinity of the residence of the defendant, Heuerman. Now, the disappearance and murder of Amber Costello. Amber Costello was last seen on September 2nd, 2010. On September 1st, 2010, the day prior of the disappearance of Amber Costello, Mrs. Costello's cell phone was contacted by a burner cell phone. On September 1st, 2010, this burner cell phone had communications with the Costello phone at approximately 11:33 p.m. and 11:34 p.m. During those communications, the burner cell phone connected to cell site towers in West Amityville and Massapequa Park. Something very notable about all these various different cases is the fact that they, as you can see, a lot of them happened in around the same areas, connected, even though they were different burner cell phones used, all similar areas.
It's notable that the 4 disappeared between 2007, 2008, 2009, and nothing was done initially. It wasn't until over a decade later, 2022, that a task force was set up to bring all the law enforcement together. There had been problems in that period of time. There had been serious problems. The locals wanted to keep the FBI out because they, of course, felt that they could handle this. Well, 10 years went by. Another issue that came up was corruption at the very top of the Suffolk County Police Department. The police chief allegedly beat someone, and then they found a bag in his car that had sex toys. Not that that's why he had to resign, but in a swirl of controversy, he had to resign. So in the 10 years, it's really very odd that nothing really happened productively on the case. And despite the protestations of the police officials, and they are on record since July of this year when Mr. Heuerman was arrested, they are on record saying, oh no, we did not downplay this case because the victims were sex workers or prostitutes. Many people in the area, especially the families of these 4 young women, remember they may have been sex workers, but they're people, the young women, they were all between the ages of 22 and 27, and their families have expressed their opinions that law enforcement wasn't as vociferous, they weren't as diligent as they could have been to go after these 4 young women. And when they did finally go after the 4, there was a lot of braggadocio, I would call it.
Rex Heuerman is a demon that walks among us, a predator.
And so law enforcement pounced on Mr. Heuerman July 13th of 2023. They actually arrested him right outside of his architectural firm in downtown Manhattan, and he has been held ever since. The pizza box we just saw was one of the ways that they did nab him. They had their eye on him through the burner phones and other location data. But they had some mitochondrial DNA, which is not 100% conclusive. It rules out 96, 97, 98% of the rest of the North American population, but it is not as definite as direct DNA. And so they tailed him and they found him throwing a pizza box out in the trash outside of his office. They nabbed the pizza box and did a DNA, and that was much more conclusive, pointing to him. I did a blog article a long time ago about a person that actually was prosecuted and arrested for spitting on the sidewalk. And the story behind that was, again, that person had been tailed and had been followed, and they didn't have any definite information on him. But when he spit on the sidewalk, the authorities went in and scooped up a swab and they sent it to the DNA lab. And sure enough, turned out that it was linked to the victim. So DNA has brought us a long way. Mm-hmm. I think that what this case stands for, however, is that all these things are great. We have DNA, we have cell phone tracking, we have, a lot of technology that just didn't exist 20 years ago, but it still takes a lot of brain power on the part of prosecutors and on the part of detectives.
Obviously, technology has gone a long way, but at the same time, I believe I read that they gave there was 10 terabytes of information to review. And for some context on that, hour-long video like we typically do is around 6 gigabytes. You need 1,000 gigabytes for terabyte. 10 years ago, computers couldn't even have a terabyte on them. So there is a lot of evidence and information, and thankfully to technology, with cell phones and the DNA and all of that stuff, we can look into it more. But it's also kind of scary to think that this went unnoticed for over 10 years when there are things like cell phone records. There are ways to find this stuff out. They did find the hair, and the case kind of went cold for a while. And it's not to make a joke out of this, but at the same time, with things like hair, it's a single male hair, and they also found the hair that it was believed to be his wife's hair. It just kind of reminds me of for myself, or it's just especially anybody watching who has long hair, it's your hair is getting anywhere. So it's nice now that we have these kinds of tests to be able to identify stuff like that, but it still feels like it just too long had passed.
Well, the other issue is, when they were looking for the first victim, they then found those 4, but they found 6 more. They found 10 or 11 bodies in total. One was an infant. One was a male body dressed apparently in women's clothes. And those 6 cases are still unresolved. They are still unresolved. Mr. Heuerman, who we're seeing here in court with the lawyers, He is accused in only 3 of the cases. They believe they're going to bring the 4th victim that you mentioned a short while ago. They believe they're going to bring that victim in because the modus operandi seemed to be the same. All 4 of them were wrapped in this burlap type substance, and they were all found very close together in the same areas, though Mr. Heuerman had just tossed them out like garbage.
Mhm.
And it's not me saying that. A lot of other observers have made that comment, as awful as it is. But what about the other ones? I have a theory about that, and my theory is that this was the story of the summer. Every summer, there's usually a big story, especially in New York. You probably don't remember the Son of Sam, but that was a big story one summer many years ago that all of the papers and TV networks were following. This was the story of this summer, and as awful and macabre and sensational as the facts and the details were, I don't see a lot of coverage. I did see some coverage. There was one documentary I watched, I believe it was on WPIX, did mention that, what about all these other bodies, and what about all these other unsolved crimes? We still do not know who the suspect was in those cases. Some have suggested that maybe it was Heuerman. Others have pointed out that they weren't wrapped in the burlap. They didn't have the same symptoms and signs. So that's a mystery that has not been resolved. That's something that's still out there. And why haven't these cases been more top shelf? It's troubling, to say the least, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, it's just like, I don't know, like we talk about, like you said, is just like he found those other victims that were a little bit different, like the kid and the male body in women's clothing. But at the same time, this is someone who, is suspected, alleged of committing these crimes. One of the things that they had found on one of his burner emails was looking up explicit images of children. So, there are connections potentially there. But if it weren't for things, obviously here we are, but there's a new interest in true crime and trying to dissect really what's going on in these cases and how people are getting away with these things for so long. I think it makes sense that, thankfully the public is trying to be involved and trying to figure out, like, why aren't these things being solved? So even though it's easy to dismiss a lot of things, as news stories, it's in a way good that we have people that are involved into this kind of stuff and interested in this kind of stuff for the sake of getting justice for these people and their families. So ultimately, maybe the other bodies won't end up getting tied into that, but hopefully this can make some movements in the right direction for that.
And one of the problems was that, way back in 2010, one of the people who knew one of the women saw the John pulling up to pick her up, and he described a very unusual kind of a truck, and that just sat in the police files for years and years and years and years and years. It's been pointing out that truck has been sitting right outside of Mr. Heuerman's house for years and years and years. It's not like a Honda Accord. It's not like I drive a Toyota RAV, and I see dozens of those every day. It's not like that. It's a very unique type of truck. It's a very unique color of truck, and it's just been sitting there. So it's a mystery why these cases sat there. The other notable thing about this case is that a lot of times when there's a case like this, people say, oh, he was such a nice guy. He was such a wonderful person. Some of this guy's neighbors have said, and I quote, he was very quiet and not very nice. He's been described as an ogre. So in part 2, what is behind the facade of Rex Heuerman? Any closing thoughts on this one, Lainey?
At the end of the day, like, it's a scary case. It's a little intimidating. It's a little extra bad when you put into the context with Amber, how there were witnesses that were able to roughly identify someone. It's obviously really tragic that it went cold, but it's good now that things are being put in motion, and hopefully we get our answers soon. But thank you guys so much for watching today's episode. Andrew, you want to take it away?
Okay, thank you, and we will have episode 2 on this particular issue and talk about what is behind the psychology of someone that does what this man is accused of being. So thank you very much for joining us. Please, if you have learned anything from this, please be sure to like and subscribe.
And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.